looking forward to our next panel. I think you will all find this very interesting as we are all consumers. And we're going to be talking about how we empower consumers with blockchain. So with that, I'll leave you with Jason. Thanks.
Hello. Welcome, everyone. My name's Jason Duty, VP of Sales with CryptoSlate. We're actually one of the sponsors here. So what I'll do is I'll just run down, let each of the panelists introduce themselves, a little bit about their company, and then we'll jump right in.
Hello, everybody. I'm Symon Perriman. I am the founder of FanWide. We have the world's largest fan club network, and we've recently adapted a blockchain strategy within our existing consumer product. So what I hope to talk about are some of the decisions that other founders might have about, do I go build my own blockchain? Do I join an ecosystem? When's the right time to do that?
Dan Itkis. I'm co-creator of GRAFT Network. We're a decentralized payment processing network. So think of it like Visa on a blockchain. It's a two-layer off-chain authorization, instant authorizations blockchain. Yeah.
All right, I'm Richard Luck. I'm the COO and co-founder of Decent. Decent is a really exciting health insurance company. We are building health insurance products for self-employed, freelancers, and folks that find it difficult to get affordable health care.
That's great. That's very novel. My name's John. I'm on the team at Every. We're helping people steal their data back from Facebook and then sell it to other people to make money.
Okay, we'll jump right in. First question for our panelists here. So as consumer business leaders and owners, when does it make sense to add blockchain to a platform? And what are some ways we can help educate non-sophisticated users?
So I'll jump in on that one first. So for us, we basically have a big social network. We've been around for 2.5 years. One of our advisors and investors came to us about a year ago and said, you guys should really look at blockchain. And so his perspective was we should go at it because investors care about it. But that's not really the right solution, right? Just because you're going to make money from it. He said, well, you know, you guys could do like CryptoKitties trading cards for baseball players, for other types of sports interests. But that doesn't really work because of licensing. But because he started to introduce the idea, our whole leadership team, we kind of said, let's really take a look at this from the technology aspect. How can we, is there really a practical way for us to use this? And it turned out that by going through this process, we actually did find several very legitimate applications of adding blockchain to our social network. The first way is, one of the ways that we make our money from our fan clubs is that sports bars around the country, they pay us to bring them new customers. But the challenge that they had is, how do I guarantee that we really brought that many people? So by using the blockchain, we have transparency built into the system, and we can show them that people really are showing up, they've checked in, that we're not tampering with the money, with the numbers. And the second application, we joined a larger ecosystem that's backed by the NFL, WNBA, NBA, a bunch of these other professional sports leagues. And we wanted to become part of a larger ecosystem so that we could share users and share the currency that they actually have on their own network. So they have a token, so you can come to an event, like a Yankees event, earn Yankees coins, and go spend them on Yankees merchandise, apparel, game tickets, memorabilia. So it was a way that we could use this currency to help retain users, drive engagement on the platform as well. So for us, you know, we looked at it, does it make sense from the technology? Eventually it did. And we went through a question as well, you know, do we go build our own blockchain, or do we go find a strategic partner? And we said, let's save, you know, $1 million, let's save a year of work, let's go partner with an existing network rather than trying to compete and build it ourselves. So I think that's a question everybody that's looking at blockchain should think about. Do I go build my own? Do I go find a partner? What's going to make us more successful and that whole ecosystem successful?
I think layering onto that too, you asked the question, when is it right to introduce this? For us, it's when it gives, one, the company a competitive advantage that we can then deliver a better consumer experience. You know, if those two things aren't true, then why are we bothering? You know, for us, in the exciting world of health insurance, there are a lot of legacy players out there that have these huge behemoth systems. They're not nimble, they're not quick, they're not transparent. And none of that is to the benefit of the consumer. So that's where we're approaching it, is how do we leverage technology for the benefit of our users?
So blockchain's a terrible database. So, I mean, I think the question is, should a company be entertaining allowing for a tokenized network to be an aspect of their business. And there's a lot of money to be made. So that's probably reason number one for a business to entertain it. I was just talking earlier. I think we're going to see a lot of like existing centralized incumbent businesses that don't democratically necessarily want to involve value inside of their network create tokens and allow for a secondary market, exchanges to pick that up, to create value in it, and then them just use that as another asset to like drive their business. And why not? Like that makes a ton of sense. There's obviously going to be a lot of shareholder conflict, especially for public companies, but I think private companies should absolutely look at creating optionality to create a new asset that they can derive value from to continue their compounding centralizing tactics. Because I think there's going to be a big divide. I think blockchain is going to be used, private chains and Hyperledger and all that shit is going to be used to centralize data and compound existing control over consumers. And I think there's going to be very few public open source chain projects that think about how to use blockchain to like ground up develop participatory economics with its network. So there's a big, that's a big fork. It's a big, pivot in the road. And so I don't think businesses today are super motivated with the existing investor strongholds that even if it's a private company that they would have, or public companies to necessarily entertain compensating the network, but creating a new asset class so that investors can maybe, who is it? It's not Overstock. Someone's doing like a Monster energy drink. I think like they did a token that you could swap with your existing shares that you hold in Monster. Correct me if I'm wrong. Someone's doing that, but that's entertaining. That's interesting for optimal liquidity for centralized firms.
There's lots of blockchain ecosystems emerging within a lot of different industries. It's allowing companies to partner within these ecosystems rather than compete with each other. What would you guys say are some of the main trade-offs in partnering rather than building?
I can go ahead and jump in on this one. So we went through a fairly detailed discussion, right? Do we go build our own sports blockchain? Do we go find a strategic partner? And there's a lot of trade-offs. The benefit of building ourselves is we have full control. That means we control the money, who's a partner, things like that. The downside of that is, we have to go build it. That costs time, that costs money, that costs energy. And so you have to kind of look at who else is doing this in the market. Who are you going to try to compete with? And so it was actually at the Token Forum back in August. I sat in the corner, and that day, a company came out of stealth mode called FanChain. So I read their white paper while I was in the room, and I was like, wow, these guys are doing exactly what I want to go do. They've got this whole ecosystem where fans can engage on a platform. It's backed, again, by the NFL, David Stern, the former NBA commissioner, Jim Boeheim, all of these top legendary names, Hall of Famers, Super Bowl champions. And I said, do I really have the ability to be a year behind them, go spend $1 million building myself, and be able to match that? Or does it make sense for us to be a partner? We have a network of 100,000 users. We can provide utility to them. So is there a way that we can build a strategic partnership? They benefit from our users. We're a great use case for them. They're looking for partners, and we can go save ourselves a lot of time and money. And so we went through an exercise with New Alchemy, who was their advisor, one of the sponsors here before, and they said, yeah, it seems like you guys are a great fit. And so what I'd suggest for any founders out there looking at it, have an honest conversation with yourself, right? How quick is it going to take you to build it? If you build it, where are the current incumbents in that space going to be by the time you've built it? What type of networks do they have? What partners do they have? And maybe it makes sense to, lose some of that control, take a smaller percentage, but have a much better chance for success.
So I want to add to this that, I think the stack is pretty thick in this industry. There's a lot of components that need to be built up in order to deliver value. So you start with transport layer, decentralized transport layer that needs to be done, smart contracts layer, ecosystem layer, applications layer. So you got many, many layers. Nobody can do everything on their own. So I don't see any other way than doing partnerships and leveraging what other people have done.
Yeah, I would glom onto that. For us, we're not going to go invent our own email protocol. It's just not material to our business. And there's no reason for us to go invent a new protocol yet. That may change because of something that was said earlier. there is a lot of activity happening in this space, and that activity is all over the board. And so it's really difficult to understand the stability of these systems, the longevity of these systems, the libraries that we're going to have to use to integrate with these systems when they're so new. So you compound that if you're trying to build it yourself. Our advice is always go try and find somebody that's mostly there, and then help them get over the line.
Or fork it. Yeah. So
that's
yeah.
it's a whole other ball of
wax. I kind
wax.
of have like my buy build hat on, so the goal is that if I'm building an asset and I want it to be protected and valuable and have complete optionality and as it pertains to my roadmap, and then continue to grow the valuation of this entity. A lot of these blockchain projects, we went to China in August and September and met with like the V-chains and Neos and ontologies, and roadmaps are it's hard to trust this ecosystem. I think Ethereum, because of the community base it has, there's trust there as it pertains to them moving towards Casper, them increasing or trying to better manage transaction fees. So like that's a community that you can engage in, but that would be a beast of fork. I know there's a lot of forks of Ethereum, but like you're biting off a lot more than you can chew with that platform. But some of these other projects, I think forking's on the table. And yes, it's a gnarly development, but if you're a network that can like drive transactional behavior, and ultimately it's like, do you want to just, it's like if I worked at Target in the innovation group for a while, and we weren't allowed to use AWS for a lot of great reasons. And so we partnered with Google Cloud, but even that was like tenuous. And so we went through a process of evaluating, do we build our own data centers? I know it sounds crazy for one retailer, but like with 90 billion cash on hand, you look at those kind of models. And so I think as some of these dApps start to take off, they're gonna have to control their destiny. And outside of Ethereum, the only other platform that we've placed any sort of bet on is our chain here locally. They have invested, but at the same time, they got a lot of developers in a community actually building the chain, and I feel like that's rare. So, at some point, as these projects take off, you're gonna have to kind of control your destiny either through an integrated partnership where you commit to driving transactional volume on a chain, or fork it or build. I think building's crazy. I think fork it would be the natural consideration.
Would you fork though for any other reason than controlling your own asset? I mean, if you just need the functionality of what the chain is offering, why fork it?
Because I don't want to pay someone. I don't want anyone to see any revenue that should own to my network. So I don't want to pay a validator. I don't want to pay miners compensation that should be going to the participants in my actual. My use case, I'm lucky because I think, as I spoke earlier, validators could be brands, people that are writing transactions could be shoppers. So if anyone's seeing upside on that transaction, I believe philosophically it should be those participants. So not everyone has like a validator built into their use case like I think we do.
Let's talk for a minute about the business and the income opportunity that blockchain and this technology is creating. And what industries would you guys forecast, whether it's happening now or maybe later into the future, that are ripe for disruption through decentralization?
So I'll start if you don't mind. So we, for one, are disrupting a major industry. It's $100 billion a year industry, the credit card processing. It touches on banks as well, but even the credit card processing part is a $100 billion a year business, and that's ripe for decentralization. It doesn't have to be controlled by one network, a couple of networks. It doesn't have to be controlled by a couple of banks. It is ripe for decentralization. There's a lot of pieces where people, by the way, I kind of take an issue with the word consumer these days, because people don't want to be consumers. They want to contribute, they want to do, they want to control the destiny. So it's almost like creator, consumer, or consumer. So people want to participate. People want to be that industry, and we're enabling that through our network. But there's a lot of similar efforts where these decentralized networks are breaking up the industry and allowing people to make the money that used to be made by a few rich corporations.
In my side, in the world of sports betting, that's a massive one that's kind of happening now. About 6 months ago, sports gambling, the ban on it was removed nationwide. So each state is now setting its own legislative around who can actually do betting, whether the states can bet. And sports betting traditionally has had a lot of corruption. So blockchain is just a great application of that to guarantee integrity, clear transactions, everything like that. So we're seeing a lot of interest in that. We have investors regularly coming to us every week looking at, from the sports betting world, looking at can we provide them with a technology using underlying fan chain, blockchain, to help them regulate it, understand things like that. So I see that being a massive one in our consumer space.
The obvious one for us is health insurance. You know, we took a stab at this industry because it's controlled by very few in number and very large in size predominant players who all basically do the same thing, and they all do it in basically the same way. And there's no reason why any of what they do can't be distributed among n number of players who want to be involved. You start thinking about, you know, risk pooling and risk mitigation. There are numerous ways that we haven't even thought about that this is going to be decentralized and self-organized. And when that starts happening at scale, it's going to be very disruptive for the big players in the industry.
So I'll just real quick, so we'll put retail aside. So online digital payments innovation and like video streaming and like CDN innovation came from the adult entertainment industry. And I'm kind of surprised that we haven't seen more traction in that space because privacy around tokens, because I think Pornhub adopted Litecoin, if I'm thinking right. So because...
Yeah, Tron, I believe.
Is it Tron? Sorry,
Yeah.
I apologize. I'm unaware. Yeah, you know, I think the idea of network participants being part of value exchanges, privacy, security, interoperability, I think, you know, I wouldn't be surprised because I know there's some projects I don't want to name, but there's definitely some projects in that space, and that's typically where you see early adoption in kind of innovative new tech.
It's interesting you mentioned that. What Gollum is doing with decentralized computer processing, similar to SETI at Home. I think that's going to take a major chunk away from AWS and Google's cloud services once that gets to scale as well. We all have sitting on your desk in front of you, you know, untapped computing power that you're not making any money off of. That's going to be really interesting when you can actually rent out your spare cycles.
So I think that's an interesting segue to this next question. How will enterprise adoption impact or affect consumer behavior from not the business side of things, but the consumer side of things and their personal data?
If I jump in, I think it's going to be inversed. I think consumer expectations are going to drive enterprise behavior. We've seen, you know, in multiple industries, but especially in ours, that what the enterprise decides the norm should be is not to the benefit of consumers and customers. And if you flip that and say, what does a stellar customer experience have to be in this industry? That's what ultimately is going to be driving that. And that's where I think the most, you know, the power of decentralization comes in play, because there become alternatives. And so if an industry wants to, if an enterprise wants to survive in that new reality, they're going to have to adjust to consumer expectations.
I just don't think we're in that new reality yet. No. So does anyone even know how many times their data has been breached from Facebook this year alone? We don't.
Do we want to know?
Right? We keep hearing about it. It's just, okay, that just happens now. So I do think that I'm of the opinion that enterprise will ultimately drive this. Now, how democratic and how much compensation the network ultimately gets in upside and reward by their value, that's like TBD. But I'm not impressed with the DApp ecosystem. There's no dApps that, like, we're a couple of years into this, you know. Folks, like, centralizing data and building products off of centralized data sets has been what's been most proficient in the market, like the Snapchats and the Facebooks and the Instagrams. And like what Pomp was saying earlier about, like, it's not as the greed, the upside for founder greed is kind of being taken off the table a little bit with these decentralized networks. There's transparency around who has what tokens. There's this democratic involvement, and so I'm not seeing the killers from like Amazon and Facebook and Snapchat running into the space, the key talent. And so I mean, I'd love to talk offline around, like, we're a couple years into this. Where's the dope app that everyone's using on their phone or everyone's talking about? It's not here.
This is literally the same conversation we had in 1994. You know, when the internet was new, HTML was live, and you still had to go to a Best Buy or a CompUSA to buy your browser, and it came in a box, and you had to install it. You know, the killer apps. Yes, I agree. There aren't those killer apps. There aren't those killer services. But we are so nascent in our evolution right now. I think to expect that those are going to come out in the next year, next 2 years, is just unrealistic. I mean, it took Amazon, however many years before they, what was it, 3 years before they actually got to any type of scale to where, you know, people didn't comment on a daily basis that they were going to go under, and that was, you know, 95. That was after the internet. So I think probably in the next 3 years. I'm hoping that in the next 3 years, the infrastructure is stable enough that things like, you know, that we take for granted, like, you know, TCP and email protocols and stuff like that, will be taken for granted the blockchain ecosystem. Hopefully, fingers crossed.
So
a lot of our
with
businesses.
With infrastructure normalized in the next 3 years, giving kind of future entrepreneurs an opportunity to build on top of established infrastructure, that would put it at like a 4 to 6 year cycle.
I think that's what we're
before
looking
we
at.
see meaningful app usage and consumption.
I think that's what we're looking at. We're building the plumbing right now.
So I'll be the contrarian / maximalist in the room. So if blockchain succeeds, if this decentralization succeeds, we will not be talking about corporations. Right, so that's the whole idea behind decentralization in the grand scheme of things. So just, you know, ponder on that.
All good. Couple more questions here. Not sure how we're doing on time. So as other areas of technology improve, hardware, software, what have you, in what ways might these improvements in current technology impact the future growth of blockchain and how it's applied at the consumer level?
I see a real crescendo of AI and blockchain. Like, it's all real early now on both sides of the fence. But the idea is the reason Facebook and Google and Microsoft, they're leading AI is because they have the largest data sets to develop algorithms against that, you know, those big buckets of data. It's hard for a small startup who doesn't have access to broad data sets that's dynamically being updated and changing to really develop meaningful AI. So if AI can gain access to this permission data across chains, I think there's an opportunity outside of those big incumbents for AI to kind of take some leaps and bounds. Because all these dApps and even all these chains, AI, I don't see that in really anyone's roadmap. And if they mention AI, it's because they were doing a token sale. They wanted to get better SEO. Like, no one's really investing into AI in the space. And I hope I'm wrong. I'm hoping there's some people out there doing that. But I would hope to see that AI and blockchain have a significant kind of like marriage in the future. And I hope that would be a beneficial play. I think so.
Okay. Yeah, we'll save it for questions here in just a second. So in the context of consumer-facing applications and the services you guys are building and working with, what are some of the biggest user interface and design hurdles to overcome in a blockchain-powered world?
I think the number one thing is it's got to be seamless. You know, to have massive adoption, users who are non-technical, they just don't need to know it's there. Like, let them use it, let them benefit from it, but it should just be running behind the scenes. Like, I think an example, right, is when you log into your computer or onto your phone, that entire process is incredibly complicated, but you don't need to know how it works. You just need to get from point A to point B. And so I think to see this massive adoption, and if you're designing a consumer-facing app, you want to just think about it works, the user benefits from it, but they don't need to worry about a lot of the complexity behind it.
So I'll take the UX side of things in payments. So if you're today, the way cryptocurrency works is your fees are dependent on the network load, not on the transaction amount that you used to pay at the store or the merchant pays actually. People don't pay anything, the merchant pays, right? So if you look at the blockchain side, it's the reverse. The user pays the fee, and the fee is dependent on the network conditions. So we're fixing that on our side to make it work like the way people are used to in payment. So the merchant would pay the fee, and the fee would be proportionate to the transaction amount. So those kind of UX fixes that need to be put in place for this world to work the way people expect it to work.
Yeah, it has to be invisible. If it's not invisible to consumers, they're going to go to the services where it is invisible. And things like volatility of value and transaction fees, they're going to reject those at scale. So we got to solve those problems.
So I'm comfortable with custodianship of private keys being managed by an external partner for users. So that's like a philosophical position. So with that said, wallets today are terrible. So I think crypto wallets, because that's the primary use case today, is speculation on these future utility tokens. So I think outside of Coinbase, everything else is dog shit, in my opinion. So, but when it comes to when a consumer engages with those tokens that they've earned or they've purchased, they've engaged with, today it's all speculation. I think the UX needs to move towards maybe them not necessarily not knowing it's in the background, or not knowing that the blockchain or crypto exists, but these are participatory incentive models, tokens. That's the goal here. And so you understanding the risk and reward by the level of relationship you have with a dApp or a chain or a network, I think should correlate directly, intimately into the UX. It should be gamified. These are incentive tools to compensate people to do things we want them to do inside of our networks as part of the utilization of these tokens. And so I think the UX should be driving people towards appropriate behavior to drive utilization of the token. If that's like what we should be doing, I think that should be a marquee aspect of this.
You're talking about people, though, that are interacting with the token, not necessarily people that are interacting with an application built on top of a blockchain that may have that underneath it. Like if I'm filing my health insurance claim, for example, I'll come back to what I know. I don't care what the underlying technology is. I don't care what the database is. I don't care what any of the infrastructure looks like. I just want my claim paid. Now, the folks that we're incentivizing to adjudicate those claims, absolutely, I agree with you 100%. They need to understand that. They need to be able to interact with that. But I think that maybe is the disconnect that we have when we're talking about this space, is that we're all coming from the experience of, I know what a token is, I've interacted with a token, and the vast majority of people that are going to leverage these networks don't.
So guys, I hate to jump in there. I think we're running a little short on time. So what I'd like to do is just ask one question to the audience, just by a show of hands. Who here is a founder that hasn't implemented blockchain yet but is considering it? Raise your hand. Okay. Who here is a founder that has implemented blockchain? Okay. So for those of you who had your hands up that haven't implemented but are considering it, courtesy of all of our our panelists, they've offered to help you guys answer questions, talk with you guys offline, share with you their experiences. So feel free to come up and introduce yourselves and fire away. Yep, I think that's it. Thanks, guys. Oh, yep, sorry. Yeah, time for a couple questions.
We have time for one question, so.
Thank you. I appreciate the benefits that you talked about in terms of strategic partnerships, but I'm also well aware that in my 35 years of being involved in some form of technology, technologies come, technologies go, companies come, companies go, and if you build your product and solution off of something that you're dependent upon, and they either have a failure, whether it's reputational risk, or they just go away. That's where my concern would be in trying to build something that had that value, is just being totally dependent upon somebody else to drive your value proposition.
Yeah, I'll tell you that. No, you're completely right, right? You take a dependency on someone, that partner goes under, that's the problem. So we have I would encourage anyone that's thinking about that, make sure you have a good contract that has those failure scenarios built into it. But if you are building a company that is entirely dependent on blockchain, that's absolutely a risk. The way that we've decoupled that risk is we still have an existing business and a company. We're just adding this blockchain technology as a feature. So if that goes away, it doesn't necessarily mean our company's gone away either. But have a strong contract. Make sure that you address failure scenarios. What happens to tokens in the network? Who runs that? All of those different considerations. If they go away, that parent company dies. Good point.
Real quick, so I'll put Ethereum aside for a second. I think the Bitcoin blockchain will outlive all of us. And I think regardless of price, there will always be a decentralized group of humans who believe in the anarchist mentality that potentially there could be a store of value that could reoccur if Bitcoin went to zero. So I believe that blockchain's not going anywhere. So if the use case maps to something you could MVP or build upon that, I would look at that.
Okay, guys, that concludes the panel. Thank you.
Thank you.